How's it going, folks? How's it going? Hope all is well with you. I am jumping on here just to talk about a couple things. I've been wanting to do a little critical theory, go over some critical theory stuff, and I think I found the opportunity to do so. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time, and here it is. And I am trying to just do some settings here, but I did want to do some critical theory stuff. I did want to go over that. Also, I have a video of course, good old Black Lives Matter, and they're burning Bibles, and you know, it's getting to a point where it's, you know, they're just doing whatever they want to do. I think this is going on in Portland, and you know, it's the usual stuff, right? It's the usual stuff that we always see from this group and Antifa. So let's not leave them out as well. But if you can, go ahead and take time to like and subscribe. This is the gospel truth, but this is called Let's Talk. This is a portion where I talk about not only I talk about the culture and things that's going on in the culture, but I do that from a biblical lens, looking at it from a biblical perspective of how, as Christians, we should deal with these things, and how we should interact with these different issues in culture. And I already have a comment here on Facebook. I think it's better to leave modern political issues out of Bible exegesis. Well, if you feel that way, Mr. Rivers, you might have a problem on your hands, because we're told to, you know, we should be involved in our government issues, right? We shouldn't just, as Christians, leave that to the side and leave that with people who, the worldly people, right? We should be dealing with these things from a Christian perspective, and I think the founding fathers also understood that. That's why we have a lot of the laws that we are under, the foundational laws, are from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and without that, we will really have a problem. And we see what's going on in the culture now and how that affects what we have, or how, when we don't stand on Judeo-Christian values, how that affects what we do as a people. And so that's just the first comment. So what Let's Talk, just to give you a quick run through of how Let's Talk is going to work, with this being a different part of the Gospel Truth platform. Typically, I'll try to jump on here as much as I can, considering that I have debates, and I try to only schedule 2 shows a week, as per my wife. My wife wants me to do only 2 shows a week, so I try to jump on here, do little quick inserts here and there with Let's Talk, so they won't be very long, and try to do a little bit of, this one might be a little longer because I do want to go over some critical theory stuff, but that is typically the way that Let's Talk is going to typically try to operate. Just make sure, can you guys hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up or say yes if you guys can hear me just fine? A quick yes will be preferred if you can. If not, I'll try to fix that. I think you guys can, so no worries, no worries. But anywho, so yeah, that's what Let's Talk is going to be about. Let's Talk will probably be about, just once again, how Christians should interact with the culture that we live in, and if we are Christians, should we interact with that culture? How should we handle these things that always are in front of us, the things that we see on the news, the things that we see even from the in-house things as well, as far as how is the church handling these aspects. So that's where Let's Talk will be. Like, as you know, on the Gospel Truth, I also host debates. I also participate in the debates. I actually have a debate coming up, or more of a discussion with an atheist coming up, so I do kind of both, and I also do interviews. And so I really wanted to revamp the Let's Talk aspect of this platform, because there are so many things that us as Christians we should be involved in, and if we try to sidestep some of those areas and we say, well, I'll just let certain individuals deal with it, now we're not doing our job. Now we're deviating away from where I think that we should interact. Hopefully you'll agree with me on that. So it's important that we are involved in these things. So with this, I do want to interact with the comments. I do want to interact with the questions. If you have questions, I do want to interact with all those things. So I just want to have a good time with this. I do want to instill the biblical values that should be instilled, and just really bring forth the truth of the gospel in this aspect, in this platform. So for those who are out there are watching, thank you for joining me. And this is not a debate. This is Let's Talk. So let's talk. Let's get into it. So first thing I want to show was a video for Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter burnt some Bibles, and I think this really illustrates the failure of what Black Lives Matter is. If you know about Black Lives Matter, there's 3 female individuals who started the group, and I think the group started right after the Michael Brown incident, where when Michael Brown was shot by a cop after he was wrestling with the cop, and I think he even tried to, I'm not sure if he tried to wrestle the gun from a cop, but he definitely was throwing the cop all over the place, and the police shot him, and in response, it was outcry, and so this group, Black Lives Matter, was started from that point right there on, and now it went to another level. It went to a much another level. I have a comment here that says they're trained Marxists. I agree. I agree that they are definitely trained Marxists. Yeah, they're definitely Matthew. They're definitely trained Marxists, and even one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement said it herself that they are all trained Marxists. And if you know anything about Marxism, Karl Marx was the root of the name. Karl Marx, if you remember him, he was anti-Christian, anti-capitalist, anti-religion as a whole. He believed that every level there was an oppressor group, and so he was considered the first critical theorist, if we have that, a first critical theorist, and then that transitioned to these other branches of more involved thought. So the term critical theory didn't come about to the Frankfurt School of Philosophy or Frankfurt School of Thought, I believe it is, where there's a couple individuals that create the school, and they the one that coined the term critical theory. And throughout the line, you start having terms like intersectionality. Then you have all these different kind of ideas rooting from the critical theory idea. So, and that's where we get all this stuff from. And we get the Marxists. Now we have neo-Marxists that are doing what they can to disrupt what we have as a country. And it's not cool. It's not cool at all. So let me show this video real quick just to give you a little bit of what's going on here. Let me show you real quick what's going on with this. All right, so as you can see, you know, the Black Lives Matter poster, these are guys up in Portland, and they're doing their thing up in Portland. And this has been going on for about 70 days almost, I believe, 65 to 70 days. Quite a long time that these protesters have been out there. Let me start off by just letting you know that it's nothing wrong with the fundamental idea of protesting. It is the problem when you when you're being an anarchist, where you're just being violent and you're being destructive and you're not showing anything, you're not doing anything fruitful, right? You're just causing trouble, right? And not doing things that will produce fruit. And here's another one where apparently, you know, they say Black Lives Matter. What about Black Christians, right? What about Black Christians who love the Bible, right? Who love Christ, and they see the Bible as authoritative, right? So they burn the Bible. They want to burn the Bible and just disrespect not only white Christians, not only Hispanic Christians, but Black Christians too, right? And they stand for Black Lives Matter. But of course, obviously, overall, they are burning Bibles, and that is obviously hostility towards God. And if you know anything about the Black Lives Matter movement, if you know anything about their mission statement, they clearly are against any biblical values. If you read their About tab on their page, they're clearly against biblical foundational value. One that stands out to me is that they're there to disrupt the nuclear family, which means obviously that they're there to tear apart the mother-father combo, the husband-wife combo in the family. So it's kind of it's kind of anti-Christian, right? So it's very anti-Christian, should I say, anti-Bible. So the foundational aspects of the Black Lives Matter group or corporation, what you want to call them, is anti-Bible, anti-biblical, anti-faith, and they promote lesbianism, homosexuality, all those things, you know, and obviously the Bible argues against those ideas. They prohibit, they prohibit the practice of homosexuality. The Bible prohibits the practice of lesbianism and all kinds of forms of that type of lifestyle. It doesn't accept it, and Black Lives Matters and promotes it, encourages it, and we should not do that. Another aspect of Black Lives Matter that just fails is the idea of abortion, having a right to abortion, to have a right to abortion. And we know that so many, I think 22 million abortions have happened over the last, I can't remember. It's a whole bunch of abortions, and obviously a majority of the abortions that happen within the Black community. So how can you be Black Lives Matter and care about Black people and care about the black people, and you know don't care about the fact that abortion Black children are being aborted at an incredible high rate, higher than any other ethnic community out there. So there's really no way that you can resolve that. So these are just some of the ideas that Black Lives Matters promotes, and obviously they promote burning the Bible. So as you can see, it's a real clip. It's just a clip. It's not like a 2-minute video or nothing like that. It's just a quick clip, and here it is. And let's go zoom in. You'll see, you know, the Holy Bible. You'll see it there. And from reading the article that I found this clip on, from reading the article, can I get my thing? There we go. From reading the article on this thing, it said that they brought a stack of Bibles. So it's not just one or two. They bought a stack of them. You know, so they are very intently ready to burn these Bibles, to do away with these Bibles. And a protest, and this falls right in line with Karl Marx. Karl Marx was obviously anti-religion. This is exactly what all of them are for, what all of them see. You know, what do? You know, when a regime or somebody's trying to take control of a people, what do first? First, they try to disarm them, right? They try to disarm. They want to take your ammo. They want to take the ability to defend yourself. Secondly, they take away that overarching worldview that you have, right? That overarching worldview that you stand on. In this case, the Christian worldview, right? So America was founded on Judeo-Christian values. I wouldn't say that all the founding fathers were Christian. Some of them were deists and weren't necessarily theists, but they did all flow in line with the Judeo-Christian value, and that's what was imparted on the structure that we have, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, things like that. And we could see that all that language of inalienable rights, you know, people have inalienable rights because they have value. And where do you find that value at? Because you're made in the image of God. Humans are made in the image of God. That's where we get our value. And the founding fathers, whether they were deists or theists, they understood that idea. They understood the fact that we have value regardless of if we're old, if you got dementia, if you're a baby in the womb. They understood these ideas. They understood that person had values. And so as we get the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, things like that, different laws in the books, you know, these are all founded with the assumption, with the assumption of Judeo-Christian value going into the Constitution and all these laws that we have today. And so when you see people or a group trying to take certain ideas away, first they try to take the First Amendment. When regimes try to step in and take control, they take the First Amendment, the ability to defend yourself, which is us, the First Amendment, our guns. Second Amendment, our guns. And then the First Amendment is the freedom of speech and the practice of religion. Okay, so And we see the cancel culture that we have today, right? We see this cancel culture where the cancel culture is saying, cancel everything that doesn't agree. So in a way, they're attempting to mute the masses. They're attempting to mute the ability to say what you need to say or what you want to say, right? They're taking these ideas, they say, no, you cannot say that because that is considered hate speech, okay? We may not agree with everything someone says, but as Americans, we have the right to say what we want to say. Just like people have the right to burn flags. Just, it is written down that we as Americans have the right to burn flags, burn our flag. And that's why you see nobody getting arrested or anything like that when we do burn a flag. Yes, Trump, he puts up a big argument about not burning the flag and, we shouldn't do that. Yeah, that's fine, dandy, but, we have the right to, you know what I mean? But it is important that we understand where we're at in this time a day, all right? Where we're at in our culture right now. And right now, burning the Bible, there's no problem. There's no problem. So this whole cancel culture type of stuff where they're attempting to mute the people from saying things that may offend or saying things that don't jive with them is ridiculous. And we see, another example is when Christians speak about against homosexuality and those things, right? They will say, oh, the Christian is practicing hate speech because we stand against that lifestyle, okay? So that's just another area where the cancel culture, where you're muting. So they take your First Amendment right, they try to throw that out. Now you don't have any power. Your worldview is gone. They're attempting to get rid of your worldview because now your philosophy of life, the worldview that you stand on, the Christian worldview, if you're a Christian, is now outed. So now they have your mind, they have your freedom of speech. So then they, obviously they took your ability to defend yourself. So once they take those two things in, now it's their ability to move in. It's their way of trying to move in now and take control. And I think that's what we're seeing when we see movements like Antifa, Black Lives Matter. I think they're attempting to, they put all these mandates out, behave this way or give us this or else, those type of mandates, you know what I mean? And it's not good. It's not cool at all. So I just want to just really give you a view of the Bible burning aspect of this and this whole movement. It's just not profitable. And I just don't see how any Christian, particularly, let me speak to the black Christians. I don't see how any Christian particularly has the gumption to support such a movement. We see individuals who wear those Black Lives Matter shirts. I saw an individual yesterday on my Facebook that wore Black Lives Matter earrings, them big old earrings. And yes, the statement is true. Black lives fundamentally matter. They fundamentally matter. Why do they matter? Because they're made in the image of God. Not because Black Lives Matter as an organization says so, but because they're made in the image of God. Now, do I need to go around saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives? No, because I think when you go around with that mantra of Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, it cannot do nothing but get rooted back to its source. And people come to the conclusion that, yes, that person is a supporter of Black Lives Matter. And I think that is a problem. I think that's where we fall short. And we don't want to be connected with a group that's clearly anti-Christian. The secularists, the atheists, social justice warrior, non-Christian, all those guys, yeah, they probably could take that term and they don't care what they say. But if we're Christian, if we're believers, right? And if we're believers and we understand the foundational aspects of what the Bible says about being made in the image of God, we do not need to pick up any mantras, any ideas that are secularly rooted, that promote hate, that promote evil. Once again, the Black Lives Matter movement promotes evil. Why? I already mentioned it, because they promote homosexuality. They promote lesbianism. They promote abortion. All these things in the eyes of God are evil. As a Christian, we should view the world through the same filter that God views it as, right? Obviously, we're not omniscient, we're not omnipotent, omnipresent. We don't have all those godly, divine qualities, but we are told to view the world in a way that is God glorifying. And how do we do that? By filtering the world through the word. And if we're doing that, we're going to understand that we as Christians cannot be rooted in something that is as corrosive and damaging and evil as Black Lives Matter. And that's why I want to speak to my brothers and sisters who are Black to make sure that you are steering clear of that movement, because it's fundamentally evil. At the most fundamental level, Black Lives Matter is an evil entity. I hope we understand that, and I hope that you understand where I'm coming from, because you cannot have two world views. Black Lives Matter is a philosophy, it's a world view. It's a way that they view the world. They have a philosophy that underpins their move and their actions. Same as a Christian. We have a Christian worldview, a Christian philosophy that underpins the way we move. Our philosophy is the Word of God. So by us being indwelled with the Holy Spirit, by us understanding that the Word of God is our instructions, we should serve God and how we should love others and how we should love ourselves as well. We're going to take our philosophy and we're going to use that philosophy because the Holy Spirit's in us, and we're going to interact with the world through that underpinning philosophy. And that's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Their underpinning philosophy is going to cause them to move in a certain direction. And we shouldn't want no part of that destructive and corrosive philosophy in our worldview. Okay, so it's important that we understand that. It's important that we understand where we're coming from when we're dealing with these cultural aspects and these things like that. So let me get a drink of water because I am parched. So let me pull up this critical race theory. So with the critical race theory, you know, I've been wanting to do this for some time. I've been wanting to go into this, and I've been preparing it. Then I went back. You know, I was going back and forth with it. You know, like what are some of the things I really want to hit on? What are something, you know? And then I kind of just lost track a little bit. Got busy with life, kids, family, all those things. I'm sure you understand. So with this, I do want to. This is a, you know, a presentation that I put together. We got some bunch of slides to it. So, and I want you guys to really be able to go through this and, you know, understand where this stuff is coming from. I'm not touting myself as a critical theorist expert or anything like that. I'm definitely not doing that. There are obviously more people out there who are more well understand, who have been doing this for quite some time, and understand it a lot better than I do. But I think I was able to pinpoint some of the major aspects, some of the more fundamental aspects. So just to give us a basic understanding of what we're dealing with as, didn't want to do that. What we're dealing with as we interact with critical theory and things like that. So let's get into this, shall we? Let me pull this up real quick. All right, so some of the things I want to go through is like, what is critical theory? What is critical race theory? How should Christians embrace critical race theory? How should Christians view oppression? So if you understand what the whole deal is with with critical race theory and with the Black Lives Matter movement, you also understand that a lot of what they're hitting on is critical race theory stuff, right? The oppressed versus the oppressed versus the oppressor. So a lot of this stuff is rooted in critical race theory of the stuff that they're fighting for or call themselves fighting for. So that's why critical race theory needs to be treated with very, very lightly. I'm not saying everything within critical race theory is a lie and you shouldn't embrace it. But what I am saying is that we should tread very carefully, because a lot of what critical race theory teaches is anti-Bible, anti-biblical. And I will, once I get to that point, you'll understand why I say it's anti-Bible, anti-biblical. So what is critical race theory? You know, like I mentioned earlier, since after Karl Marx, we can see that the critical theory developed into a different areas of primary objectives. So as I said already, you know, it developed into different areas of study. So just keep that in mind. Like, it's rooted, like I told you, it's at the Frankfurt School of Theology, things like that. So yeah, it's rooted in this area of critical theory, but critical race theory is what we're going to get to. So I'm not going to read all these, and hopefully you can see them well. Hopefully the writing's not too small, but this is just a bunch of areas. So you got like post-colonialism, critical pedology, pedagogy, how you pronounce that? Pedagogy, I can pronounce that word. Postmodernism, feminism, black feminism, queer theory, you know, and then you see at the bottom, critical race theory. And these are just different areas that's within the umbrella of critical theory. Yeah, it's just some of the areas that critical theory focuses on. So what is critical race theory? Simplified critical race theory says intersectionality. You know, intersectionality, if I could put it bluntly, is basically, if you think of an intersection and there's many streets going to this one intersection, right? So you take a person who is black and female, right? So she has two intersectioning areas where she can be oppressed, or where she can be an oppressed individual. And these two areas are interacting with each other or coming across each other. And that's creating even more areas of oppression. And so if you're a black, female, pedagogy, man, thank you. Pedagogy, thank you, Matthew, I appreciate you, man. Yeah, so pedagogy, but back to what I was saying. So intersectionality is the idea that there's multiple areas where one person can be oppressed. So if you're black, female, and a lesbian, now you have three areas of oppression, right? So there's multiple areas where oppression could happen, and that seems to be where the area of you know, this person's oppression. So the attempt at intersectionality is, I guess, is to try to focus on what is going on with this individual, or as a people group, what is going on with certain individuals, and how many areas of oppression this person is facing. So the next thing is white privilege. You know, white privilege refers to the social privilege, the benefits that white people have over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, and economic circumstances. So white folks, if you're white, if your pigmentation is lighter, you have privilege, okay? You're white, you have white privilege based on the color of your skin. Based on the color of your skin, simple as that. Because white people, according to critical race theory, have an advantage. They have an advantage over those who are non-white, just by simply the color of their skin. And you got the term white fragility. I don't know if you read Robin DiAngelo's book called White Fragility, which is like a #1 bestseller. Can you believe it? It's like a #1 bestseller. And it has experienced crazy review, and some of the reviews are extremely harsh, right? Some of the reviews are extremely harsh, and it's hilarious, right? It's hilarious. I see some comments coming in. I'm going to interact with those comments as soon as I get done with this, man. I really want to get done with this. I've been wanting to do it for a while, so don't think I'm ignoring you guys out there. Sorry, let's go back to that real quick. So you have white fragility, you have color blindness. Dismissing or downplaying the relations of race and racism can perpetuate inequality and violence. So if you go around talking about you colorblind and you don't see color or race, then you're going to perpetuate, you're going to trigger some kind of violence or something like that, right? You're going to play a part in causing violence. All right, so yeah, it's some interesting terms here. Internalized oppression. So is the personal, conscious, and subconscious acceptance of the dominant society's racist views, stereotypes, and biases of one's ethnic group. So you have an internal. So if I'm a black person, well, which I am black. So if I don't view the societal structure as being oppressed, then I'm just a victim of internalizing my oppression. So I'm not dealing with my oppression out on the forefront. I'm not dealing with my oppression out on in an open, right? I'm not woke, right? If that makes sense. I'm not woke yet, right? So I am internalizing my oppression, right? So yeah, that's pretty much the fundamental idea of that. So lived experiences refers to the representation of the experiences and choices of a given person and the knowledge that they gain from these experiences and choices. So the lived experience. So in other words, what they would argue is that you should not tell a black person to hush because, or about racism or anything like that, because of their lived experience, right? Their lived experience is how they express themselves, right? And it mutes that knowledge, of that lived experience, and you don't want that, according to critical race theory. And heteronormativity is the belief that heterosexuality, predicated on the gender binary, is a term of default sexual orientation. It assumes that the sexual and marital relations are most fitting between people of opposite sex. So this is critical race theory. Now, if you look at heterosexual normity, it talks about the idea of how lesbianism is how heterosexuality is not necessarily the correct way to view relationships. And this is one area why critical race theory should be treated lightly, because this is anti-biblical right here. This is anti-biblical, 100%. And as you already saw, a lot of these areas of the study of critical theory, critical race theory, black feminism, all these areas are centered around that kind of language of diffusing the nuclear family, and that's where it gets damaging, right? That's where the Christian worldview is beginning to be compromised by such a philosophy of this, or a study like this, critical race theory. These are some of the, in particular, if you look at the female on the right, that's Robin DiAngelo, and she's the author of White Fragility. Okay, she's the author of White Fragility, and like I said, been getting a lot of reviews and things like that, especially in the current culture that we live in, right? In the current culture that we live in, we're seeing a lot of this stuff, right? And I robbed these pictures, that textbook page that you see that's highlighted, I robbed that from Dr. Neil Shinvey. And I don't like to use the term rob like I stole it, but I didn't steal it. I asked him for permission. I told him I was going to use some of his stuff. So he was okay with that. So anyway, this page, as you can see, the oppression, they break down the groups, right? So you got the oppression, the oppressed. So racism is the oppression. Classism is the oppression. Sexism, heterosexism, religious oppression, anti-Semitism. Was it ableism, nationalism, colonialism? And then the dominant agent group. So if you look at the oppressed group, and you see next to it the dominant agent group, you see whites, owning class, and like these are the dominant groups according to critical race theory. These are the dominant groups in these areas. So racism, yes, white people are the agents of that, the dominant agents. And it's funny because in my life, I've seen black people be racist, white people be racist, Hispanic people be racist. I've seen self-hate, where people hate their own people, own ethnic group, whatever it is, So, I think racism is something that deals with the heart, and you can't lump it into one group and say, oh yeah, that group is the most dominant group. How would you even, statistically, right? How would you even gauge that statistically? Like, who goes around and does surveys and say, are you racist? Are you racist? Like, how would you even gauge that? And that's one of the problems with this stuff. It's like, how can you say that white people are the dominant agents? Like, you would have to get statistics get my words out, statistics to back that kind of claim up, and you just don't see it. So owning class, classism, and you got the sexism. Men are more sexist. What? Come on, man. Females can be sexist too. Come on now. heterosexuals, Christians, you know, see Christian, you know what I mean? So it's just different groups, man, in this that they claim, according to Robin DiAngelo and Ozum Sensui, I believe that's her name. They create this class, you know, this ranking, you know, and I think I don't think you can prove that for sure. So, what is hegemonic power, right? Hegemony refers to the control of the ideology of society. The dominant group maintains power by imposing their ideology on everyone, right? Their ideology. So the idea of a hegemonic person or hegemonic power would be an example. If I can give an example, would be like a 60-year-old white dude that is a Republican, Christian, right? So old, white, Christian, and a Republican. Boom, you have if you could think of an image of someone who might be the hegemonic power or have that hegemony, it would be that person, right? Old, 60-year-old Christian, white, heterosexual, and Republican. That would be the idea of a hegemonic power. But like I said earlier, some of these terms are true. So hegemonic power from the idea of an old white dude, you know, Republican Christian, I don't think that's very true. But hegemonic power does exist in the idea of like, what does society say how someone should look, right? How someone should look. So society says that you're beautiful if you're skinny, right? So that's what society would say, and I think we can all say that's true as a Christian. That is correct. That idea is out there. So if you're overweight and you're overweight and you're not as good looking, if that makes sense, right? So that's the hegemonic power that's overarching our society that says these ideas are correct. So we do see that idea out there, and it's obviously incorrect. The idea is someone's only beautiful if they're skinny. But if you're talking about society or what they say, sometimes they do say that, and we can agree that that is out there. So this is one area where we can agree that hegemonic power from that aspect is true. Okay, it's true. Okay, so then it says, this is crucial. Traditionally, this is from Dr. Neil Shenvi, who I mentioned earlier. Great guy. I had him on my show. I interviewed him, and he's a great guy. So I definitely recommend you guys looking him up. He does a great lecture in a more broad aspect of critical race theory, and he does a great job. So Dr. Neil says, this is crucial. Traditionally, oppression is understood to refer to acts of cruelty, injustice, violence, and coercion. But critical theorists expand this definition to include ways in which a dominant social group imposes norms, values, and ideas on society to justify its own interests. So, critical theorists, they've expanded this definition, right, to add these type of things into it. And that's pretty much the understanding of it, So like I said, old white men are the enemy. They have the ability to impose their philosophy on the culture through though numerically they are the minority. So the white man has the ability to oppose their philosophy, their ideas on everyone. Okay? So beware of old white men, 60-year-old white men, Christian, Republicans, and heterosexual. We can't forget the heterosexual. Okay? So that's the enemy right there, man. So be sure to look out for that according to the hegemonic understanding. All right, so lived experience, it says, and this is a quote from philosopher Jose Medina, and it says, groups characteristically have experiences that foster illusory perceptions about society's functioning, whereas subordinate groups characteristically have experiences that, at least potentially, give rise to more adequate conceptualizations. So the reality that we live in, how we view the world. So in this image, you see the oppression epistemology. So the knowledge that the oppressor is blind by their privilege, right? I also stole this image from Dr. Neil Shenvi too. He has some great slides, so I had to get some of them anyway. So this idea of the oppressor is blind by their privilege, right? They're blind by it. So they don't realize it because they are privileged, right? This is obviously talking about a white dude or a white girl, a white woman. So they have this oppression, this experience, right? So the conscious and some subconscious reasons to deny the oppression. So so it typically, I guess, according to critical race theory, white folks, they tend to find reasons to say, no, I'm not racist for this reason and that reason, this reason. You know, some might say, well, I'm not racist because I have black friends, right? And you know, some people are like, so what? You're still internalizing your oppression. You're internalizing it, right? You're not allowing. You're not being true to what you're doing. So after some study, you know, going off this chart, after some study and whatnot, you come to the understanding of lived experience. So by understanding the lived experience of other people, you now become like, oh, you become woke, right? You become aware of your privilege, right? You become aware that you are a privileged group. So when you see individuals like Robin DiAngelo, right? When you see individuals like that, and these individuals are jumping on there talking about, yeah, your lived experience, your white fragility, right? When you hear individuals talk about that, you know, I know I'm privileged and I'm white. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff is horrific. It's ridiculous. And now, because you understand that you are privileged and you can outwardly say such a thing, I'm privileged because I'm white, now you are woke, okay? You are woke, all right? You're no longer dismissing your privilege. You're no longer missing your inherent, yes, I said inherent, according to critical race theory, your inherent racism. You're no longer denying it. You're accepting it. So that is what that's all about. So once again, these are several terms. I'm not going to read all these, but I do want, critical theory. The thing about critical race theory is that there's really no pinpoint definition. Like, I can look up the word, you know, sociology, maybe that's a bad word. Maybe I can look up the word or the study of philosophy, you know, and get a definition of it. You know, the study of ethics, you know, the reality that's non-physical, metaphysics, you know, you can get a fundamental idea of what philosophy is. But critical race theory, you see this plethora of definitions, right? And that's what makes it so confusing, right? You can't pinpoint it because every time you turn around, it adds something to it, you know? So it's kind of hard to get through it. But I'll read like one of the definitions, right? It says critical race theory also relies on racial realists or individuals who not only recognize race as a social construct, but also realize that racism is a means by which society allocates privilege and status. Yeah, you know, so that's just one area where CRT or critical race theory finds its root or definition. You know, so there's a whole bunch of them. If you're interested in reading all these, you can go back through the show. You can go back and rewind if you want to go through all these definitions. But there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here with this stuff. So I can give you one straight up definition or one lump statement of critical race theory. This is by Richard DiAngelo and Gene Seffer's book. And it says, the critical race theory movement is a collection of activists and scholars interested in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. It not only tries to understand our social situation, but to change it. It sets out not only to ascertain how society organizes itself along racial lines and hierarchies, but to transform it for the better. So, you know, this is what I guess the goal, the overarching goal of what critical race theory is all about, right? The overarching goal. If you look at this definition, if you look at this, you would say, well, critical race theory ain't that bad. You know, if you just look at it flat out like that. But when you start diving into different branches of what critical race theory looks at, you know, and how many assumptions are made and how statistically there's really not a strong backing. I mean, you got some statistics that say, yeah, this and that, right? And thus critical race theory is true. You know, you got some areas that may suggest that it may be true, but I would say there's no overwhelming evidence that says that critical race theory or the definitions within critical race theory, like intersectionality, systemic racism, those type of terms can be validated, like truthfully validated, you know, and that's why I reject them, and I think that you should reject them too. I'm not convinced. So what So these are some of the, once again, the terminology that we find in race theory, and we went over some of these things already. Systemic race theory, racism I mentioned just now, intersectionality, whiteness, white privilege, white guilt, victimhood. CRT operates as a worldview. It definitely does. It operates as a worldview. CRT has a direct philosophical issues that conflict with the Christian theology and teaching. It does. 100% it does. 100%. What it teaches conflicts with Christian theology. It conflicts with biblical teaching. And that's why, as Christians, we should reject it. We should not operate within that realm. Yes, you're going to use terms. You're going to use terms that. You're going to use terms that that are associated with this theory. So when you use those type of terms, it's not that you're now a critical race theorist, like you're full blown in it, but I think it's fair to say that you're doing critical race theory. So if I, you know, even if you disagree with critical race theory, right? So if I say, well, critical race theory, if I say white privilege, if I begin to explain white privilege, if I begin to explain white privilege or something like that, then I'm doing critical race theory. Okay, so but I'm not a critical race theorist, right? I'm just doing some of it, if that makes sense. So I just kind of want to explain that because I had some gripe. You know, I talked with somebody and they said, well, you can't say that we're involved in critical race theory, if we use a certain term. Well, I can actually. I can. You're doing it. You know, you're doing it without you knowing it. It doesn't matter if you know it or not, but you're doing it. Okay? It doesn't matter. All right? You're doing it. You're practicing critical race theory. So, once again, these are some of the terms that this worldview operates in and that you can find within critical race theory. So, systemic racism. And I think systemic racism is the foundational aspect. If you can prove that systemic racism exists, then critical race theory has a strong argument. Once again, I'll say this again. If you can prove that systemic racism currently exists, then critical race theory has a strong prevalence and has a strong argument. Okay? The goal is to prove systemic racism. And if you can prove it, hey man, no argument for me, man. But you have to prove it. And that's a problem. I think that systemic racism is assumed. I don't think it's proven. I think it's assumed. And when we talk about systemic racism, we're not talking about little pinpoint areas where somebody might experience racism. We're talking about a system that is overarchingly designed to mute or to oppress a certain people group, right? So obviously in America, this idea of systemic racism, worldwide, you know, they throw this term. It would say that black people or people of color are the oppressed group. So the system is designed to oppress people of color. Do people of color experience racism? Yes. Is it systemic? I doubt it. I sincerely doubt it. So racism is ingrained in the fabric and system of American society. And this quote is from the UCLA School of Public Affairs. So I'm not just throwing definitions out there. This is from UCLA. Like I would think that UCLA is a reputable quote, reputable source. And this assumption means, see, it said assumption itself. This assumption means that the individual racist needs not exist in order for institutional racism to be pervasive in the dominant culture. This presupposition, combined with the Marxist view that all relationships are best understood in terms of power dynamics, cause CRT to assert that existing power structures are based on white privilege and white supremacy, which perpetuates the marginalization of people of color. So the thing is that it's assumed and it's a presupposition. It's not anything that's factually hardly proven, right? I don't think it's hard proven that systemic racism exists. Once again, racism in its instances exists because it's something that deals with the heart of man, right? The heart of man is sinful. So yes, it exists from that aspect. And it's also CRT assumes that people of color are inherently oppressed and marginalized by power structures and rooted in white privilege and white supremacy. Yes, 100%. That's what it argues. Okay. So systemic racism teaches that the overarching political, judicial system, legislation system has racism inherently woven in. The problem is that they're extremely hard to prove. One would need a law that is codified, a codified law. So an example of a codified law would be like a law called like Jim Crow. Jim Crow would be a codified law, a law that is codified into the system that says that certain people group are oppressed. Okay, so you have to be historically dismissive, or you'll have to be historically insulting in order to reject Jim Crow existed, right? So Jim Crow did exist. If you don't know what Jim Crow laws were, Jim Crow laws, an example of Jim Crow laws would be laws that says white bathroom and black bathroom. So it'd be segregation, right? It'd be these laws that segregates the community. That says only black people can use these black restaurants and white people can use these white restaurants. Blacks are not allowed on this bus. Things like that. You know, like you remember like things that Rosa Parks experienced on the bus, where she had to move to the back of the bus, or she refused to move to the back of the bus. Like that would be something like legislation in the system, right? And it's hard to I can't think of any laws that are on the books that would say yes, these laws are here to prohibit a people group, a colored people group, right? So one of my arguments is there is no law in our country that directly and only affects people of color. One would need to live in the past to try to prove to anything. And that's true. That's 100% true. In order to prove that systemic racism exists, one would have to live in the past. Nobody's going to deny that this stuff happened in the past. Whether you're white, black, whatever. Whether you agree with it and say it was okay to do that to people, that's another story. That's an ethic issue. But nobody would deny historically, in the right mind anyway, would deny that Jim Crow happened. Nobody would deny that slavery was a lawful institution where people by the law had the right to own slaves. And they even had laws on the books of how slaves should be traded. I mean, how much a slave should cost, the value of a slave. Like they looked at black people as cattle, even lower than cattle, I would say. So we cannot sit here and say that it didn't happen. It definitely happened. The problem is that in order to prove systemic racism exists, one would have to live in the past and continue to stick in the past and say, see, systemic racism exists. No, it doesn't, man. It does not exist. Systemic racism does not exist because there's no law on the books currently in the same fashion that the laws were on the books with Jim Crow. There's no laws on the books currently that says that these people group are not to excel. These people group are not to be allowed to succeed or to advance, right? There's no law. Jim Crow, yes. Slavery South, slavery, yes. It happened. It happened. But is it happening now? No. Unless you're somebody who lived in the past. Now, some people will argue and say, well, the fact that our legacy is damaged, the black person's legacy is damaged because of what happened in the past. And yes, it is damaged. Anybody that's fundamentally, you can't deny that the black heritage or the black families within this country has been damaged, fundamentally damaged because of what happened in the past. One area is the amount of money, gross money, that families have, right? The black community, I can't remember the exact number, but their value as far as cash or riches is extremely much lower than that of whites or Asians. So it has affected our legacy, but does that conclude that systemic racism, meaning that the system, overarchingly, the system is designed to oppress a people group, does it still exist? Does it still exist? The answer is no. Okay? The answer is no. And in order to show that it still exists, you will have to do some leg work. You have to do some backflips in order to show that it works. Some people may bring up the argument of black people are not hired as much as white people based on their name. You know, they don't get the call back based on their name. And it happened. You know, statistically it happened. You know, there's no denying that. Some people, but I will say that's just an instance of racism. It's not a system thing. I don't think it's a system thing. All right. So, it can be complicated, but I don't think there's any strong argument that suggests that it's systemic racism happens. Does not deal with the heart of sin in individuals. Systemic racism does not deal with the heart of sin in individuals, but deals with groups and identifies by racial identities. It doesn't deal with sin. All right. The right to abort children would be an example of laws that are codified. So yeah, that is a law that's codified right now, right? If there's any group that is oppressed, it's babies in the womb. Babies in the womb. Now, abortion is an example of codified law. 100%. Because people have the right, legislatively, they have the right to kill their unwanted child. Right? All the way up to, I think Trump dismissed the idea of aborting at 9 months. If it was up to the liberal party, babies would be aborted up to 9 months. Up to 9 months. Right? So if there's anybody that is oppressed, any people group that is oppressed, it would be babies. Babies in the womb. And this is the thing I really want to emphasize, okay? So some people will argue, yes, Matthew, that is systemic. Big time. That is systemic. Big time. It's horrible, right? So, yeah, but it's, some people will argue and say, well, it's up to the individual if they want to get an abortion or not. Nah, I mean, but that doesn't mean that we should have a law on the books that says you can kill people. And these same individuals that say that, if there was a law on the books that said, currently on the books right now, that said, yeah, man, we can knock off black people. We can kill black people. They have to be at least 10 years old, though. If we had a law on the books with that, people will be outraged. Right? People will be 100% outraged. Right? So why are they not outraged when it comes to the baby in the womb? Why are they not outraged when it comes to baby in the womb? Baby in the womb are human beings. And this is the funny part, is that some Christians, they call themselves Christians anyway, would say that, oh, the baby in the womb, I'm all against abortion. I'm pro-life. Okay, bet. So why aren't you as aggressive as you are with babies in the womb, black babies in the womb? Why are you not alarmed about the rate of babies being killed in the womb? And these are black Christians too. Why are you not outraged? Why are you not angry at this? Right? It's inconsistent. Let me tell you something. One of the ways that you can see that an argument fails, one of them is inconsistency. If someone is not being consistent, that is a sign of a failed argument. Yes, and I host debates. I've hosted a lot of them, and I see a lot of inconsistencies sometimes. And what happens? That debater typically loses the debate because they're not consistent. So if a black Christian says, yes, I value the black baby in the womb, but yet they don't put up a fight, they don't argue about it, they don't go to the lengths that they go with the Black Lives Matter movement, they're being inconsistent. They're being inconsistent, and that is a sign of a failed argument. Okay? The sign of a failed argument, people. That's key. Okay, that's important, because if they're inconsistent, how can you take them serious? How can you honestly take them serious? Okay. So, like I said, the right to abort is obviously codified law. I mean, it would take some crazy gymnastics to get around that one. All right, so I developed a little syllogism here, a syllogism of how this whole systemic racism thing works. It says if there are and this is how they argue, right? And I think it's begging the question. I think it's a begging the question aspect. It says a fallacy, should I say? It says if there are racial disparities, then systemic racism exists. There are racial disparities, therefore systemic racism exists. Hold on, you can't do that. I think that's begging the question where you're attempting to say your conclusion is correct without proving your premise, without proving your first premise, right? That is what you call begging the question, and I think this is a clear case of it. And I think this is exactly how those who are proponents that argue that systemic racism actually exists, I think this is how they argue it. Instead of looking at that there are racial instances, right, where racism exists, right? And they argue from the idea that because disparities, systemic racism must exist. No, that is a horrible way to argue, and it won't get you anywhere. You got to prove the premise before you can say that your conclusion is correct. Otherwise, it's a fallacy and it's begging the question. Can't do that. That's wrong. So these I'm just going to go through this real quick because I really do want to get to these slides. So it says, does systemic racism exist? The first question is asked, do you mean by... So that'll be some of the first questions that you ask when you encounter someone who says that systemic racism exists. You ask them for their definition. And Neil Shenvi actually told me to do this. Dr. Neil Shenvi, he said, that's the first question you want to ask. Is what does he mean by systemic racism? Because once again, some people will argue and say systemic racism is the idea of someone of the damaged legacy. The problem with that is that doesn't show that the whole system is racist. That's the problem. It shows that yes, we've been affected by racism, but that doesn't mean that the system is currently oppressing, right? It's currently oppressing. For specifically, currently oppressing specifically against people of color. So that's the problem there. And some people will argue, if your definition is that it's interwoven with the government, you will have to prove that. If your definition is that it shows disparities, once again, you have to prove that. Okay? Some of these sentences are due to people having longer criminal records. Okay? These are some of the ideas. I'm not saying that it's 100% true or 100% false, but these are some of the ideas that need to be taken into consideration, that perhaps black people are in prison at a higher rate because typically black folks have a longer criminal record. A lot of the times they do when they get put in those situations. Some of them have a clean record, but a lot of them have a longer criminal record, thus the longer sentencing. And yes, there has been racial situations inside of the judicial system, right? We've experienced, I just read an article some weeks ago about a judge actually selling people to or convicting people, in a sense selling. He's getting paid by doing this. He's selling people to the criminal system and putting them in jail, right? Because we know that the prisons are make money, man. The prison system, man, it's buku money being made in that system, right? So there's no denying that. So by putting more people in jail, the more money that these owners of these jails make. I don't know exactly how that whole system works. I'm not going to go into it too much, but they make money off the amount of people that's in jail. So what they do, they keep the jails packed. So we do know that systems, that racism, instances of racism do exist, but we cannot lump and say that the whole judicial system is racist. Every judge. I mean, this has to be the most organized thing in the world, right? I mean, you're talking about every single judge, every single lawyer has to be racist. They have to be aware of it so they can continue to perpetuate the systemic racism. Organized. It has to be so organized, unless you are experiencing, you're oppressing your racism. It's just crazy, right? So once again, the burden of proof is on the affirmative, those who argue and say that systemic racism exists. So if you're a person and you're arguing with somebody that says systemic racism exists, they have to prove it. They have to prove it without a shadow of a doubt, right? They can't just say they can't just say that it exists. They have to prove it. Okay. And some of the arguments of racism, it says, blacks don't get approved for loans as much as white people. It's true, right? It's true. But also whites don't get approved as much as Asians, right? So should we say that white people are oppressed by Asians? Of course we're not going to say that. You know why we're not going to say that? Because it goes against the narrative. It goes against the overarching narrative of systemic racism. Because once again, the argument is that people of color are oppressed. Not Asians and not white folks. They're not oppressed. And white folks are the hegemony or the hegemonic power. So therefore, white folks ain't supposed to be getting oppressed. They're supposed to be doing the best of all people. White folks. That goes against the argument, right? Blacks, I mentioned this earlier, blacks don't get calls from employers due to race. But there's a study out there that says that white folks with strange names don't get the call back either. And I put the example of Penelope. You know, Penelope would be an off-base name. And they don't get the call back as much either as a person who will be named like John or Bob or Tom or Marlon. Funny, Marlon. But yeah, so they don't get the call back, right? They don't get the call back. All right. So, you know, it will be, once again, the affirmative has to prove that point. They have to argue that. Does the system of racism exist? They have to prove it. So make them prove it. Don't put the burden of proof on you. All right. It says arguments that systemic racism does exist. Black people get long jail terms. I already talked about that. They do. I mentioned the criminal record. It says black kids get kicked out and removed from schools more than white kids. This is true. The problem is that black kids get kicked out of more regardless of the race of the principal. It's a behavior issue, not totally a race issue. Does racism exist? Yes. Are there instances of racism? Yes. Could there have been instances where black people were kicked out purely because of their race? Yes. There may be some racist principles out there. But that does not argue that systemic racism exists. That's a faulty argument because you have to make a bunch of assumptions. You have to make a bunch of assumptions in order to prove that systemic racism exists. And I'm not convinced it does. And these are some charts that show the whole lending thing as far as getting mortgage loans and things like that. Some of the sightings of why people don't get loans is black people stop going for them. If you read this little quote I posted here, the black community stopped really attempting to get loans. That's one of the reasons why the margins dropped so low on trying to get the loans. And sometimes it's credit history as well. The credit history is not as good. It's not as established. You know what I mean? So there's my point is not to say that these are the reasons or to ironclad say that systemic racism does not exist. My point is to say that there are other influencing factors, variables that go into reasons why people may seem to be oppressed. Okay, there are other influencing factors, so we can't conclude like, yes, because black people don't get loans as much, systemic racism exists. No, that's a horrible way to argue. That's just a ridiculous way to argue. That's not how to argue. You got to prove your premise. Prove it first, please. Prove your premise, and then if you prove it, then we can talk about it. All right. And this is an argument from charter schools, where charter schools of how charter schools are beneficial in the inner city, the urban communities. So I would say that obviously the secular public school arena is pretty bad. There are areas where some public schools are doing better because they're in better areas, but we do have charter schools in those urban areas that are doing significantly better than those public schools. So my recommendation would try to get these kids into charter schools. All right, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this, so I'm not really going to spend too much time on this. And these are some of the terms. Intersectionality, it can be confusing, a ball of confusion. There's less insight on more and divisive ideology. That is less of an insight and more of a divisive ideology or worldview. Intersectionality is a problem because it creates confusion, right? Not one. They're not oppressed by one thing. They're oppressed by multiple things. So how can you even deal with the issue? It's a ball of confusion. All right. So that's how I would look at intersectionality. I don't think it's real. I think it's damaging and divisive. So here it is, white privilege. You know, it's dehumanizing, right? Because if you're judging somebody based on the color of their skin, you are dehumanizing that person, right? You're not looking at the person from the heart now. As soon as you see a white person, you're judging him based on the color of her skin, or her based on the color of skin. You're saying that because that skin is white, because that pigmentation is pale and light, I know that person got white privilege. No, you don't know that. What about that person's lived experience, right? What about that person that grew up with no parents, or both parents drug addicted, right? If they care so much about lived experience, allowing lived experience to exist, then why would you dehumanize somebody based on the color of their skin and say, yeah, because you're white, you're privileged? No, that's horrible. It's dehumanizing, and it's inconsistent once again. White guilt attributes guilt to innocent individuals. This is why it falls. White guilt fails because it contributes guilt to innocent individuals. That's why it fails. It's not right. Fathers shall not be, and this is biblical text right here that says how the son does not inherit the sins of the father. They just don't. They don't inherit the sins of the father. The Bible says it. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. That's Deuteronomy 24:16. Again, in Ezekiel, yet you say, why should not the son suffer from the iniquity of the father, when the son has done what is just and right, and has been careful to observe all my statutes? He shall surely live. The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not suffer from the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. Boom! Right in your face. Right in your face. The biblical text says it. White guilt is an illusion. It's a fantasy that the proponents of the critical race theory, the proponents of Black Lives Matter, all these individuals, sociologists who perpetuate these type of ideas. The Bible is the authority upon which we stand on, and we as Christians should lean on what the Bible says first. That's how we interact with the world. The Bible says that no one is guilty due to someone else's sin. Okay? We are only guilty because of our sin, because of what we do. Okay? So you're not guilty because of what your forefathers did, your ancestors did. No. You're guilty for your sin. You're guilty for you, and you're righteous because you're righteous within yourself. God has blessed you and called you out your sin. He made you righteous. And you're wicked because you're wicked. Individual sin. You're responsible for your own sin. Okay? So this white guilt idea is absolutely fallacious. It's horrible. It's a horrible place to argue. It doesn't make any sense. It's incoherent. And it dehumanizes, and it takes away the guilt that should be properly allotted. Okay? By saying that people are guilty because of the color of their skin. Just based off the color of skin, you're guilty. All right? It should be rejected. It's bearing false witness. It's a sin. You can't bear false witness. That's against God's law. All right? So that idea should be just 100% rejected because it's sin. So how should Christians embrace critical race theory? If we are fair, we can see areas where critical race theory can be considered a social fact. So if we're honest, yes, we see some areas where I brought up the hegemonic power, hegemony. That's true, that some areas of hegemony exist. You can't reject it, right? Come on, man. You know, once again, your reality is faulty if you reject that kind of stuff. Racism does exist. CRT obviously argues that it does exist. So yeah, it does exist. Oppression does occur and it's evil. We can't deny oppression, people. We have to deal with it. It exists. So let's not reject it. We understand it does. The Bible speaks of oppression all over the place. And what does God say about oppression, right? We should not, we should work to help those who are oppressed and unfairly treated. 100%. The Christian should be leading the march, right? We should be helping those who are oppressed or unfairly treated. But we don't need to adopt critical race theory in order to do that. The biblical foundation, the authority of the text, the authority of the Bible is all we need in order to deal with these issues, these areas, right? I mentioned hegemonic power does exist. CRT can have its positive aspects and should be considered, but do we need CRT to understand the things listed above are bad? We do not. Why? Because we have the Bible. We have God's word. We have the biblical text that says this is bad. Okay? So we need to look at the Bible, and that is our authority upon which we stand and how we should view the world and interact with the world. Okay? Should Christians embrace? It says thus, CRT should be rejected in totality due to the objection to the biblical truth and theology. CRT rejects the individual sin and only focuses on the oppressor as sinful. And that's a problem with CRT. It only focuses on the oppressor, right? It only focuses on the oppressor. It doesn't come to the conclusion that everyone is sinful. Only the oppressor is sinful. For all have sinned, Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's Romans, right? All have sinned and fallen short, not just the oppressor. There's no one good, no, not one. Romans chapter 3. There's no one good, not just the oppressor. All people who are in Christ are sons of disobedience. Who are not in Christ, are not in Christ, are sons of disobedience. Ephesians 2:2. Once again, not just the oppressor is the son of disobedience. All who are not in Christ are. The intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21. From his youth, right? From his youth, all men are sinful. 8:21, Genesis 8:21. CRT creates problems for the purpose of Christ's atoning death on the cross. It does. It does. CRT creates a problem with the atonement, right? Did Christ only die for the oppressed? No. He died for the sins of the world. And whoever comes to faith, whoever believes in him, right? And that's a combination of those who might have oppressed before and those who've been oppressed. It's a combination of both. It delineates and declines the important value of the atonement and what Christ did on the cross. And that's why CRT is not biblical and it should be rejected. And I stole this once again from Dr. Neil Shenvi. This picture right here and another great picture. And if you see his link down below, you can't click on it obviously, but you can type it in your browser and you should go there. It's a pretty good article. He has a whole bunch of stuff on there. Should Christians embrace CRT? CRT operates as a worldview. It does. And these are the two differing views. So you see the Christian worldview up top. It says creation, the fall, redemption, restoration. So this is the timeline of Christianity, if you will. How Christianity, the theology of Christianity is in the biblical structure of its worldview, right? And critical race theory obviously has no creation. We can throw creation there and say that it came from the pit of hell, Karl Marx or something, I don't know. But that's where the idea came out. And while the Christian says that the reason that people are sinful and things are happening that are evil is because of the fall, critical theory would say patriarchy, white supremacy, heteronormality, toxic masculinity, capitalism, ageism, ableism, cisgenderism. All these ideas are the oppression, right? That's the oppression. That's this wokeness, right? If you realize that kind of stuff, right? And then you got the redemption, Christ atoning death on the cross, right? Christ's redemption on the cross, right? And that's how people come out of their sin. But according to critical race theory, it's protest, a resistance, activism, education awareness. And do we see it now? Do we see the oppressor doesn't have a way out, right? He doesn't have a way out, right? Away from their oppression. But in order to atone, quote unquote, atone for the oppression, it's not through the changing of the heart. It's not through the realizing that Christ is the Savior. It's through protest and awareness. Okay, so we see the colliding aspects there. And restoration. We know that there'll be a new heaven, new earth. Once it's all done, God will fully restore everything that was damaged by sin, that was lost by sin, right? But according to critical race theory, the way to restore is equality, power reversal, liberation, justice, diversity. Do we see the problem here? And why critical theory as a system operates as a worldview? Okay? There's a problem there, and it doesn't flow in line with the Christian worldview. How should Christians respond to oppression? All right, so just read these real quick. Christians should care for the oppressed. So it says in Psalms 99, the Lord also will be stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in time of trouble. We should live our lives as much as we can to follow Christ. Christ is Lord, Christ is God, and he said that he's there for the oppressed, and so shall we. We should be there for the oppressed, right? Because we're called to. Number 2, it says, do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Okay? The laws of Exodus, God laying down his laws to his people. Do not deny justice. We should do right by justice. And the Christian should remove those biases, if you will. If you can, remove those biases and look at everything through a biblical worldview and how we should handle those type of situations. Number 3 says, there will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your brothers and toward the poor and needy in your land. Deuteronomy 15:11. Once again, be there to help them. Be there to help them. That's how we should deal with oppressed people, right? Religion that God, our Father, accepts as pure, faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Okay? So these are biblical verses that says that we should do what we're supposed to do as Christians to make sure that we're there for the oppressed. Okay? It's important that we do that. Care for fellow man. Finally, all of you be like-minded, sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. 1 Peter 3:8. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Galatians 5:14. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourself. Philippians 2:3. The Bible is clear of what Christians should do with oppressed people. The Bible is clear. Obviously, the gospel comes first. Whether you're oppressed or the oppressor, the gospel is key, because you could be oppressed and be a stone cold sinner. So we need to come with the gospel. But fundamentally, us as loving people, because they're made in the image of God, we should be there for the oppressed people, for people who are oppressed, and our justice is not being served to certain individuals or lack thereof. We should be there for them as Christians. Just as we're there for those who are aborted, like the whole abortion situation. We're speaking up because babies are oppressed, right? Babies are oppressed. So we're speaking up. We should fight against abortion until the day we go into our grave and go be with the Lord. We should be fighting against abortion because they are 100% oppressed. They're innocent and they can't defend themselves, and they're being murdered by people. And we should fight for their justice. So a lot of times, typically Christians, sometimes, some folks anyway, I'm not gonna say all, but some folks don't know, they are reluctant to just hearing people out. And I think as Christians, we should be open to hearing people out. So if someone who comes to you and says, yeah, man, I think systemic racism exists, the important thing is not to immediately jump and say, yeah, man, you're lying, or you can't prove it. I think it's important for us to listen to what they say. And perhaps if we help them, we listen to what they say, we can help them realize what the real issue is, and which is sin, right? So we can tell them the gospel and stuff and help them in an area that they're suffering. Okay? So it's important that we listen, I think. And it says, know this, my beloved brothers, let everyone be quiet, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So we shall listen. James chapter 1:19. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. Proverbs 18:13. Make sure we are listening, people. We need to listen to what these people are saying. All right? Because that could be a stumbling block for them. All right? A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Once again, don't be quick to with ideas like systemic racism. Let's hear what people have to say first, right? Let's hear what's being said, okay? When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable, but he who restrains his lips is wise, right? He's wise. Those who restrain their lips, right? Let's make sure that we're listening. Let's be an example, okay? Some of that example is just listening to what they're saying, okay? All right, and then I think it's the last slide, folks. It says, be well-rounded. Take time to read books that concern oppression and struggle. Take time to read about it, all right? And see what's going on in that areas, because you can't make an argument and say, well, this is garbage or whatever, but yet you're ignorant of any of the study. You haven't interacted with anything. You don't want to be ignorant out there. So be well-rounded. Try to study areas that don't necessarily fit your culture. All right. So I don't know if I meant to say culture, but fit your understanding or your worldview. And make sure you're studying things that help you understand other contrary worldviews. It will be help you to be more well-rounded, understanding the plight of others. And as Christians, we should do that. We should want to understand the plight of others. Why? Because we also experience that plight. We also experience those areas of dissatisfaction, those areas of sin, and Christ has brought us out of those horrible lifestyles. So we should be sympathetic, and we should understand or seek to understand the plight of others and their struggles, because Christ has shown mercy towards us and brought us out of our sin. Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in gentleness of wisdom. So let's be gentle, folks. Okay? Let's be gentle. Let's love people as we're supposed to love them. Okay? Let's love people as we're supposed to love them. All right? And, that's the end of that. That's the end of the presentation. But I did want to just give I hope this is helpful. I hope it gives some level of understanding, and at least on a fundamental level. If you decide to dive more into it and jump and look at more scholarly work on these areas, I encourage you to do so. But also, obviously, some of these scholars are secularists, and they don't have the Christian worldview in mind. So I would say be careful if you dive into this stuff. But I did just want to give a fundamental, basic layout of critical race theory and what it is, and should the Christian embrace it? Should the Christian how should the Christian handle it? And I hope that I've done that, at least that much justice. But with that, that's all I wanted to talk about. I'm sorry I can't really deal with any of the comments. I see a whole bunch of comments. I dealt with a couple of them, but I did not want to stay on here very long. But I did want to do that because I've been wanting to do it for quite some time. So I'm not sure when the next Let's Talk will come up. It's one of those things where I'm trying to sort of fit into the schedule along with the debates. So I don't want to overwhelm the schedule. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. I thank you for joining me on this episode of Let's Talk, which is also with the Gospel Truth. So if you can, make sure that you're liking and subscribing, please. Make sure you're hitting the like button, the subscribe button, and hit that bell, the notification bell, please. Make sure that you are in the loop of the Gospel Truth, because I have a whole bunch of debates coming up that are coming up in the future. So check it out. Also on Facebook, obviously. Make sure you're liking and following there. Subscribe there. And make sure that you're, staying involved, and make sure you're in the loop of what the Gospel Truth Let's Talk is doing. All right. Thank you for joining me, and may God bless you.